So, welcome to the Superintendent's Roundtable, which is sponsored by SayConnex, an ongoing project of Wednesday Journal and Success of All Youth, underwritten by the Good Heart Work Smart Foundation. So, thank you guys for joining us for this conversation. I'm kind of sitting in on something that you guys do, monthly?
Monthly officially,
Right.
and then sometimes informally, a little more frequently, depending on what's going on.
Okay.
We normally have some type of communication, almost on a weekly basis, in one way, form, or fashion.
So, for people who may not know who each of you all are, can each of you introduce
Sure.
yourselves?
Okay, I'm Dr. Joylyn Pruitt-Adams, and I'm the superintendent for Oak Park and River Forest High School District.
And my name is Ed Condon, and I'm superintendent in River Forest District 90.
And I'm Carol Kelly. I'm superintendent of Oak Park Elementary School District 97.
So we wanted to basically talk to you all as if, we're kind of a fly on the wall. It doesn't have to be that intimate. But the issue is racial equity. It seems like we're at a kind of an opportune moment when it comes to equity, not just racial equity, but equity across the board. For people who don't, kind of understand what racial equity is and why we need it in Oak Park, what would be the best way to break it down to somebody, walking on the sidewalk, doesn't go to board meetings, has no familiarity with, school talk or bureaucratic talk.
So to me, for racial equity, I will just give the example of myself. I am a very proud product of public schools. I grew up in Philadelphia, an inner city. And I think what the potential of public schools is that it can totally change the trajectory of a student's life. So while neither one of my parents graduated from high school, I was able, because public schools should provide for every student, regardless of their zip code, regardless of who their parents are. It should provide for every student what they need to be successful in high school and beyond. And I was afforded that opportunity, I think, because I fit the mold for school. But racial equity, we have seen, regardless of a student's or family socioeconomic status, that still in most public school systems, our students that are traditionally underserved, it's predicted based upon a student's race. So I would say the majority of Black and Brown students, if you look at discipline, if you look at academic outcomes, we can still predict those outcomes based upon a student's race, and that should not be, particularly in a community like Oak Park, where there's such diversity socioeconomically in all of our neighborhoods. One would think that we would not have those same issues as we see across the nation, but we do. So one of the reasons why I was attracted here is because of the potential for us to address this issue and really to be a lighthouse community, not just a school district, but a lighthouse community for the rest of the nation.
And what's really exciting is that there are communities and schools and districts that belie that more frequent outcome. My first experience actually with racial equity was as a principal in a school district not far from here. Highly diverse, admittedly a very affluent school district with not much income inequality, but importantly, students, regardless of their racial or ethnic backgrounds, were showing high performance across the board. And so that was my first experience of seeing how that does not have to be a precursor to a certain outcome.
So there's no racial achievement or racial equity gap.
No significant gap at all.
Yeah.
So, and that really is, I think, the aspiration, at least in District 90, that we're striving toward, that a young person's either racial or ethnic background, or for that matter, any of the other elements that traditionally represent historically underserved child. So a child may be from unconventional family structure or from a lower SES, that doesn't have to be the determinant
You say SES
of their
Social
success.
economic.
Yeah, that's the goal that we're striving toward. So
So for me, my definition may be a little bit different. And I think part of it is due to my lived experiences as growing up in a time where I've been a Negro, I've been Black, I've been African American, and now I'm Black again. And as the definitions have changed, but during the time in which I grew up, I never went to school with people who didn't look like me. But I had teachers whose expectation of me was a little bit different because they too did not look like me. I think college did it for me with solidifying why I got into education in the first place. And that was to remove the barriers for brown and Black children. That the perception of, by the virtue of the color of my skin, that I could not rise to the same level. Down to a professor in my master's program asking me why did I want a doctorate. I had a master's, wasn't that good enough? Or always saying to me, how did you learn that? Who taught you that? Sending the subliminal message to me that because I was Black, I could not. Having a counselor in high school tell me I should be a file clerk versus trying to be a teacher. I think it was my mom's definition for me that as a Black female, I had to work harder. I had to get a good education so I could take care of myself because there would be barriers put in my way. And so one of the things that drew me to Oak Park was the deliberate and intentional actions to develop a community that is diverse. The other thing is, while I came from a predominantly Black school district before, where the community was predominantly white and Jewish, but the school district was predominantly Black over time because of white flight. The conversation here was different. That there was voice of education, not just in Oak Park and River Forest, that every single meeting you were in, every single superintendent's meeting, race was a key factor in the conversation, and about removing those barriers that exist. For me, it's access and opportunity, and often they don't have that. And so my passion here is, I believe there is the doability, the potential to make that happen. And when I say systemically, I'm not just talking about within our 3 institutions, but in this community. That there's a collective that really wants to make this happen, and that this is the time to stand against those voices, because there are voices here in opposition. That if we all stand collectively, we can get this done. And so if someone asked me about my definition of what it means to address race here, that's it. It's hitting it head on. And my peers, my colleagues here, I think we are all up to taking on that challenge.
I think the story is so interesting. My mother had similar, your Jordan could be my sister, not my mom. But when I was in high school, my mom would not, this is why I can't cook, right? I was not allowed to take, home ec and things of that nature because she had that experience too. Whereas for me, I don't know, I was just blessed. I had teachers when I was in elementary school that helped my mother. Philadelphia did a desegregation order when I was in elementary school. Now, Brown versus Board of Education was, 1954? So even almost 25 years later, in Philadelphia, schools were very segregated by where you lived. And, I had teachers in elementary school that on their own time, they would take us in their own cars to visit various sites in Philadelphia that we would never get to outside of our neighborhood. And they advocated for me, in helping my mom to get me to a school where kids came from all over, if they had a certain test score they could get into. So for me, I had the complete opposite. I had teachers who did not look like me, but they were really advocating on my behalf. I just think that all students should have that. And unfortunately still, even though you have pockets of school districts or even teachers where they don't have they have really, equitable outcomes for all of their students. It's not the norm yet, but I definitely feel that it's possible.
Yeah. I grew up in a time where we were tracked.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were track 1, you were going to college.
Mm-hmm.
If you were track 2, you could go to trade school. If you were track 3, they just want to get you out. And if you were special ed, it was 2 years and it was called terminal ed. How negative is that? And so being track 1, I was on the college track. But my mom had me in ballet, tap, dance, charm school, reading clubs, so that in her language I could fit in a white world. And I had to talk a certain way and dress a certain way. And I taught special ed for a long time. And the day that I said, I think I want to go into gen ed now, she was pleased because she said I could dress like people would then perceive me as someone who had an education.
Some people may think what you just described fits the mold, part today. What are some of the subtle differences between the tracking that you talked about and the tracking, or what people may perceive as tracking in OPRF?
We've tried not to use the terminology tracking in OPRF. The difference, I think, from when I was in school, because I was in an all-black school, and so we were divided as to who could and who might and who couldn't. I think the underlying subconscious or disconsciousness that exists in Oak Park is that my child must be in the AP and honors track. That shows that they are and they can and they will. And there is a perception, though, that if I come in and I am in college prep, which could be a false title.
Yeah.
Okay. In most institutions, that's just the gen ed courses. They don't call it college prep. But if I'm college prep, if your child's college prep, then they must not have the ability. And so the hidden message, I won't say the hidden message, the message I get is when we first started the conversation about looking at our curriculum and removing the barriers and access for students. You heard last night about the freshman audit. We've had parents who said it's too much too soon. This is going to impact my child, and you must be watering down the curriculum. That's not the case. The case is making sure that the trajectory through is clear and concise, that the curriculum that is being taught is going to be rigorous, and that you move those self-imposed barriers, the criteria for students to get in. You remove that, and you have every student come in on a level playing field. If you don't know where they are academically, then you remove that, and the expectation is that every single child who comes into that class can and will succeed by the virtue of what I do to support them, versus the preconceived notion that they can't. That's an issue that we have in this community, that there are people who say, I am not racist, I am very liberal, until it knocks on my door. And then that's where we begin to have that struggle with the connotation of honors, college prep, honors, and AP, when it really should be putting kids in the best possible program that supports his or her individual academic needs. And it should not be based upon how they look or the preconceived notion that because they look like me, they can't.
At last night's town hall meeting, Greg Johnson, the assistant superintendent, said something I didn't know. A lot of people don't know that. He said 40 students. There are only 40 students out of 900 students in the freshman class.
This year's all of their classes are college prep.
Got it. So that means the average freshman, at least,
has college prep and honors.
A variety of courses, right?
But there's a preconceived notion that someone hears college prep, and I don't want people to think that our college prep program is not rigorous, because that's not the case. It is a highly rigorous program. Our question is it rigorous enough? Does it really push students to their full potential? But I do believe there's a preconceived notion that when they hear college prep, they think that that's the track that student is in. And you heard the young lady last night say, I have college prep, I have honors, and I have AP.
One of the things I've been really impressed about the work over at OPRF in trying to address these barriers and you mentioned this in your comments, but I just want to shine a little bit stronger light on it, is that their process to try to move forward in making course offerings available to kids, regardless of their background or their previous experiences, has not been simply opening the door and saying you should apply for and be admitted into classes that you may or may not be prepared for. Very intentionally, the high school has ensured that those supports are in place so that as they're bringing the barriers down and ensuring that those children have access, they're being deliberate about making sure that their instructional foundation is there to be successful, because that's the goal. It's not just giving individuals opportunities, it's giving individuals opportunities for success.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we look at here at District 90 up at the high school, and with a great deal of regard. So something they're doing, of many things, something they're doing very well.
Thank you.
A lot was made this election about certain curriculum changes that happened in District 90 that some parents in the district felt, sort of what you were saying, that you guys were watering down curriculum in order to accommodate students who some people feel are not where higher achieving students are. Can you kind of address?
Absolutely, I'd be glad to. So there's really two major curriculum changes that we've seen in the last couple of years, and of course more on the horizon. But implementation, the most recent implementation was in our adoption of our math curriculum, and we work in partnership with the UIC West Cook Math Initiative, which is an outstanding outfit, serves many school districts in West Cook, and our faculty, of course, to look at the math programming that we're providing for kids. And there's a lot of recent research, when I say recent, the last 5 to 8 years, about best practices in math instruction. Without getting too far into the weeds, much of what we know about high quality math instruction today does not mirror the experiences that many of us had as children in a math classroom. High quality math instruction today looks like kids engaging with math in deeper and broader ways, having the opportunity to work collaboratively around solving problems, having the chance to explore concepts in math, as opposed to having an algorithm provided for them or a solution provided for them by the teacher, and then simply being asked to complete some problems to demonstrate their understanding of how the application of that solution brings them to an understanding of math. And so that was our most recent adoption. We've seen some very positive changes, but admittedly we're in our first year of the rollout. So right now we're at the stage where teachers are implementing that curriculum K-8, but we're still providing ongoing professional development for that. The other curriculum changes were a reading curriculum adoption that was about 3 years ago, done in partnership with the Teachers College from Columbia University in New York, and then in between those two, literature adoption. And so we've tried to be very methodical. I'm really proud, if I can be indulged with the time, I'm really proud of the efforts that our teachers have made to both be at the table in looking at best practices in instruction in all three of those areas, ensuring that the adoption process mirrors our vision as a school district and our core principles of what we want to be doing in serving our students through teaching and learning, and then adopting materials that are research-based and evidence indicates are advantageous to all learners, not just learners who traditionally succeed in a textbook-based format, but students that maybe come from historically underserved populations. One of the elements of our equity initiative that the Board of Education supported several years ago was efforts to ensure that we're implementing across the board with much more regularity pedagogy that research indicates is advantageous to all learners. So that includes the adoption of co-teaching practices. We're doing a lot of learning at this stage in partnership with a group called CAST out of the East Coast around Universal Design for Learning, which is a framework that is really ensures that students are much better able to engage with the content, that they have some say on the way they demonstrate what they've learned and how they're engaging in the content in class. This is learning that, of course, has come on the scene relatively recently about how we can be doing a better job, with kids and learning in general. And so, but that can be hard because, as I mentioned before, it doesn't necessarily represent the school experiences that many of us had as children. And that represents a shift. So we're doing what we can, and I'd like to compliment our communications coordinator, Dawn Simmons, our principals. We got an outstanding director of curriculum instruction, fantastic new special ed director. These are the people that are really trying to send that message, take the message out to families about what the changes are, but more importantly, why they're important and how we think they can move us further toward our vision of ensuring excellence for all students.
You said universal design for learning. That's supposed to be like the cutting edge. I mean, it's kind of...
It's pretty forward thinking.
Education or whatever. Do you, District 97 and District 90, do you all share curricular change or curricular ideas with each other in implementation?
I would say most of the conversations more informal, and I do know that for the UIC project that Ed mentioned, that our math teachers also, my first year, were involved with that. I believe, in terms of what we share in common, District 97 also is now doing the Teachers College at the K-5 level, and it's we're using that for both reading and writing. But I think, my experience is a little bit different. I don't know if it's because I was, went through public school on the East Coast, and they experiment on us a little bit more. But, my mathematics...
You seem to have turned out just fine.
Here you go.
Yeah.
But my mathematic background was more, and science, it was more inquiry-based. I did something called unified math. So it wasn't as... lockstep as it is here with specific courses. But I will say that that could be one of the reasons why undergrad I studied engineering, because the math came so easy for me. I would also say that there are some practices here that I found. I have two sons. They are now 20 and 23. And when both of them were in kindergarten, they had inclusive practices, meaning the universal design and differentiation and co-teaching. That was just like really normal practices. So
can you explain what co-teaching is?
Co-teaching provides an opportunity for students that have an individual education plan or IEP, our special ed students, to be in a general ed classroom setting. And what it allows, what the research shows, is that it really helps to accelerate the growth for students that have learning differences. And I believe what we're seeing here in River Forest and also Oak Park is more and more of those instructional practices are coming here. And you're an East Coaster.
I had a few years out there in Philadelphia. But the concept there is that basically you have special educators collaborating with general educators in the same classroom. And not only is it more inclusive for the students, but when those educators are really collaborating together intentionally around the lessons, it's an accelerant for all the kids in the class. They're partners in teaching, and the students in the classroom don't necessarily see differentiation, or I shouldn't use that word because it can be misunderstood. But they don't see a difference between the general educator and the special educator, and they're working together to move all the kids forward. It can be a very effective model.
It supports them as well in the social emotional development, as well as the academics.
I agree.
Because it removes that barrier, that stigma tied to between special ed and general ed. And I think that is something that all three districts have in common, is that there are levels of co-teaching in all three school districts.
Can we talk more, though, about that social emotional piece? Because I don't know if I'm stealing your thunder. That may be a question you're about to ask. But
I'm the fly on the wall.
I think that's so much at the heart of this. And I know as an observer, I see both District 200 and 97 doing a really good job embedding social emotional elements into your instructional program. How are you seeing benefits from that?
Oh gosh, I literally just got an email the other day with a situation that happened outside of school. And the mom said, thank goodness for a second step, which is the curriculum that we've been using, really K-8 across the board in all classrooms, because her children knew how to respond to something that happened. And it was a pretty serious situation. For us, we're really focusing on all students having a sense of belonging. So that's a major metric that we asked the students. We're using the survey. We actually got this idea through District 90. We kind of made it our own, but it's that positive learning environment survey.
Good.
So we give that to all of our students in the fall and the spring. And we're seeing some, slight improvements. I think from the time that we started a couple of years ago, we are about a 2% increase in, students saying that they feel a sense of belonging when they're at school. But we're seeing some really innovative things that, again, a really shout out to our principals and building leadership teams and staff. They're doing some really creative things to help our students feel a sense of belonging and really making our schools welcoming environments even for our families. But I think the helping students being empathetic, the second step curriculum has helped us with that. We've added the culture and climate coach to share between our two middle schools. Both middle schools now have teachers that sit on a culture and climate team. We've done some audit work with, there's an organization with Positive Behavior Intervention System, PBIS, Midwest Consortium that's pushed into audit. So we still have a lot of work to do around social emotional learning for the students and to get to the place where all students feel a sense of belonging. But I agree. I think it's a foundation that's necessary before we can see a lot of improvements on the academic side. I think the social emotional, students need to feel comfortable, they need to feel welcome, and they need to feel a sense of belonging before they can, feel that they can engage with the learning. And not that we intentionally do this, but I think some of the trauma that happens to students that, put up those barriers to learning are things that sometimes happen, in our schoolhouses.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think it's good even as the teachers are teaching this curriculum that they're kind of learning strategies themselves.
Yeah. There's actually some research. It's interesting you mentioned that, and you may be referring to it specifically from Stanford University, a project called the PERTS Project, and I should know what that stands for, and I don't.
Yeah.
But there were 3 elements that were evidence-based, where if they're founded with frequency and on a regular basis, those 3 elements are if students feel welcomed by the teacher in the classroom, that they believe that the teacher thinks they can do the work, which of course is a growth mindset element, and that the work matters to their lives.
Absolutely.
The impact that has on children's learning and their willingness to engage is really substantial. And what it all comes down to, we're talking about a lot of different things today, but at the end of the day, it's relationships.
Relationships.
It's how people are situated to each other, whether it's teachers and students, students to students, families to the school,
Absolutely.
all of those things.
So our third goal of the way the strategic plan is structured now is supportive learning environment. And one of the objectives is by 2019, June of 2019, 80% of our students will feel welcome in this environment, and that their teachers know them and appreciate them. And so while we don't have a formal curriculum, we did have a course that Avi Lessing taught. And he worked with a group of teachers, and it was solely around...
Avi Lesson is the English teacher at OPR.
And it was solely around celebrating students and making them feel good about being in that environment. He's in the second year of a $25,000 grant that allows him to develop an app. And his idea for the app was, so if Michael has a core group of teachers who he's connected to, and Michael gets a new job, it goes out so that whatever class Michael goes into that day.
Yeah.
Hey, Michael, I heard you got a new job.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Hey, Michael, this
Yeah.
is your class. So that's
Yeah.
part of it.
Oh, that's cool.
So that was a pilot that was
Yeah.
that was started prior to my arrival. This is the second year of the grant, however. And so Avi is now also an instructional coach.
Okay.
And so one of the roles of our instructional coaches, we have 6 of them, or is it 8? 6 or 8, is to work with teachers on understanding the background from where our students come. Because relationships is a key component of the social and emotional piece. And so that you have some type of connection. So helping teachers understand and navigate how I teach each child individually, having that child know that I am vested
Yes.
in you and your success. In addition to that, the district, the state of Illinois mandates that you have a PTAC committee. That's the Parent Teachers Advisory Committee. And the whole notion of that committee is to look at the student code of conduct and to change that annually. At Oak Park and River Forest High School, we took away the PTAC moniker, and that group is now called Culture, Climate, and Behavior. And so we look at the whole child and what that looks like. And the overarching focus of that committee is to make sure that our students feel welcome, our students have a voice, our teachers have a voice, and our family and community have a voice in everything that we do. And so the bulk of the recommendations for the 18-19 year was really focusing on a welcoming environment. So some of the recommendations that came out of that was having programming that our parents and our community feel good about coming to and listening to. The town halls are an example of that. That we need to revamp our activities fair because we wanted more students to feel welcome and that they could be a part of this. So we're revamping that. One was the message signs that you see
Yeah.
all over the building.
Yeah.
And our students put things up there so they can
good.
say, this team won today.
Okay.
When we did the Imagine work, we had about 150 focus groups with students alone.
Oh, wow.
What do you want our building to look like? What would make it more welcoming for you? And so the students had, if you see the video, the students say, we want to be able to be in school. If I have an activity that starts at 5, I don't want to have to go and sit in that little open area from the street to the hall until it's time. I want a space where I can be. And so in phase 1, project 1, is common spaces for students.
Oh, nice.
And so that our students have a place that they can go. That adds to that. You heard about the curriculum last night. There was some pushback about that. But that's student voice. And that's giving students the opportunity for people to know who I am and what I am. So that I have a role in the school. The student leaders group is a sense of belonging. And they tell us, you know, we had students say, you know, this policy could use this. And for us, that's critical that if you are a part of this community, and this is what we're about, is educating you and preparing you for the future, you need a seat at the table. And that's difficult for some people to embrace. And so in our restorative justice practices, it's tied to that relationship piece. And so the reason we invited community members, because sometimes if you're outside, I think you said it earlier, Carol, you don't know how even words that you say outside of the building impact our kids.
I was going to get into that because at last night's town hall meeting, there was one person who gave some pushback to some of what was said. A lot of people some people look at racial equity and things like welcoming, and they see like the term that was mentioned last night, white shaming, or they see. So how do you get community members who may not necessarily be familiar with this kind of vernacular? How do you get them to know that, or persuade them that this benefits them and their children as well?
I don't know if we will ever persuade them. And I have to say, because there are some people who are so set in what they believe that everything else must be wrong. For me, it's transparency, having them sit at the table. There are people in this room who will tell you every single committee that we have, there's community voice, there's student voice at that table. I think that's one way. as we said last night, we need to, how do we saturate all that's happening so that people know? Because we've had some teachers who say, whoa, I didn't know all that was going on. Yeah, it is. So that's one reason we, as an institution, are restructuring our strategic plan for next year so that it comes more systemic within our own institution, and then we become the ambassadors. There's a group that's meeting tonight, Community Council, that they serve as the ambassadors for the district to get that message out about what we're doing. We invite people in. You heard the young man last night speak to some dated data.
He wasn't young. He was young.
I know that's my terminology.
I'm like,
I
I
always
remember
say,
that.
No, I always say young man or young lady, regardless of how old that they are.
Okay.
That's just a
That makes me feel worse. You've been calling me young man all these years. I thought maybe.
So it's just a normal. But and so being able to, so we reached out to him and said, if you want to sit down and talk, we'll show you our data. That's one way, but that doesn't mean we'll ever change his perception.
I think though, going back to last night, that example that you gave, I believe that he, and a lot of people, sometimes when you hear terms like institutional racism or systemic racism, that they take it like an individual, personal, and it's really not about the people, it's about systems that, have historically over time have helped to produce the results that we see. So, just going back to Joyce Lynn's definition of what is racial equity to you, some people might say it's providing to all students what they need to be, successful. But honestly, a lot of our work, and I strongly believe, this is just my personal opinion, should not be, if we're going to get to those results where we can't predict outcomes for learning or behavioral outcomes based on a student's, background, like what they look like. We will have to remove those barriers and give all students access, as well as change our mindsets that really all students can learn at high levels, going back to that growth mindset that Ed was talking about, and really helping people to understand, when we're calling out institutional racism and changing some of our practices, at the elementary level, so that by the time our students get up to the high school, they are ready for those higher level classes. When I say higher level, I mean thinking levels. That, it's not about fixing the students, it's about fixing the system. So I'm all for, providing, extra help and tutoring support. I think that's great because we're not all wired the same. Sometimes we just need like more time, more space, different ways and approaches for, for us to get the information. But I believe that all students can learn. And I think as systems leaders, we have to really critically examine the system. So as I heard that young man last night ask the question, I think still a lot of individuals think that when we call things out, we're blaming individuals, and we're not. We're talking about systems. I'll give you, for instance, in D97, we are still working on, our shared definition of a program called GTD. I believe, I don't know the acronym, but I think it's gifted and talented. I don't know what the D stands for. Is it development, perhaps? Differentiation. And I noticed that our second graders went through a series of tests, and as students entered third grade, there were students that received the label. And the program that we provided for the students in mathematics, we said that all of you can skip third grade math and you go to fourth grade math. And as we have begun to explore, how do we identify students? What are the assessments that we're using? Are the assessments that we're using barriers to students that don't have the same, like preschool background. We noticed that our core curriculum was somehow tied into this program, and it really should not be. And we began in 3rd grade, and then this year we're doing 4th grade. We began to really support our classroom teachers in designing math lessons that will meet the needs of all of our students. And I think that was, a barrier to not providing for all of our students really access to what they needed in mathematics.
You say the core curriculum was tied into the gifted program. What does that mean?
That basically means that the enrichment in mathematics was provided to the students that had the label, but the way that we were doing enrichment was just saying that you can walk up to the next grade level. Whereas today, what we're doing is the math class, every unit we teach, all of our students receive a pre-assessment, and from unit to unit, those students that are receiving enrichment changes based upon who the students are and what their needs are. So we're finding that we are able to provide more enriching experiences to a wider breadth of students and not just the students that were labeled as GTD. So that's just one example of a barrier, that perhaps for elementary students that did not receive the label GTD, they are now receiving more enrichment than they had previously.
Are you guys moving away from the label gradually? Or?
No, in the state of Illinois, we have to have a program of acceleration. It's in our code. But what we're doing with our core program is moving away from just a group of students, being labeled in this group and receiving more enrichment. And we're finding that, from unit to unit, whether it's geometry that the students are doing or number sense, our needs vary. And we have to provide for those students the support based on where they are. But in terms of the acceleration program, we will always have an acceleration program. We are exploring how we can ensure that we are screening students in ways where those numbers are not disproportional to the demographics that we have in our student population.
Can I actually go back to something, if it's all right? I hope I'm not changing tracks too quickly. But regarding your kind of previous question about the concept of white shaming, it is challenging, I think, to have conversations in America, certainly in this day and age, around race and ethnicity. It's challenging, of course, in different ways for different people based upon the experiences they have and how they're walking through this world. And we all carry with us, of course, all of our experiences and our culture and our background. But there's a lot of research that indicates that two concepts particularly are really powerful and need to be acknowledged. And that would be stereotype threat when working with children or working really with anyone, and the power of implicit bias. And to folks, I think, where this feels heavy, and it feels, I think, heavy probably, if we're thoughtful and reflective, it feels heavy to all of us. It should, in this day and age, in different ways. But I would want to encourage them to take some solace in the idea that implicit bias exists in all of us. And while it's not necessarily something we would want to embrace, just to have an awareness that no matter who we are, what our race or ethnic background is, our gender, our social-economic, so we all carry with us these biases. And so that should be, in some ways, freeing for people.
So break those terms down, like what is stereotype and what is implicit bias for somebody who may never have heard the terms before.
Well, for example, one of the things we built into our CARE team, collaborative action research around equity, and into our talent management, that's our hiring protocol. In CARE teams, we are reflective on our own practice, and we have taken there's an assessment you can do to see what your biases are and how we subconsciously perceive people of color, people based on their race,
disability,
disability,
any number of things.
Gender,
Yeah.
age.
And there are biases that exist among people of color.
Mhm.
You know, whether my skin is too dark or too light.
Right.
And it helps you, for the most part, bring it to your consciousness
Yes.
so that you don't predetermine
Yes.
individuals.
Right.
Yeah.
As a part of our hiring this year, all of our hiring managers and individuals who will sit on a hiring committee must go through implicit bias training. And so what we've also tied into is the work that we're doing on racial equity, just to bring it to your consciousness.
Right.
Um,
However, because I want to follow up on that previous thought, what you do with that,
Isn't-
once you're aware with it,
Right.
you do have responsibility for it.
Absolutely.
And so, the freeing part should be
Yeah.
the realization
That
that we all carry the baggage.
Yeah.
But then the responsibility we have
Yeah.
once
What do
we're
you do
aware
with that?
is how.
Individuals have to do their
So if
homework.
if a employee is found to have a bias, what does the school do after that? Where do you go from there?
Part of our racial equity work this year is to bring that to the forefront of our consciousness and how we respond, how we act in the decisions. For example, as a superintendent, how does that impact our entire student population, our community, but most importantly, our most disenfranchised students. And so for me, in care team, I have to reflect on the decision I made last week and really take myself through a process of what would I do differently at this point in time and the why I would do it differently. And so that's professional development for our whole team. You heard us speak last night about we have 2 coaches. And so if I see that this one person is just not getting there,
Yeah.
the notion is that care team leader would have a conversation with that person and say, perhaps you could use additional one-on-one coaching with one of the coaches. And so that's our way of addressing it, because one of the things we have to admit at OPRF is we've been doing racial equity work a long time, but it has not become systemic in our institution with what we do every day. And so that's why as a part of our 5-year transformation plan, we have to focus on us first as individuals and the biases, as you said, that we have. And so how do we change that? But we also have to challenge ourselves that if I see that someone is not, I have to call their attention to it and how it is impacting me, because sometimes even though I've been made aware of my biases, that's just a part of who I am. And if I don't bring myself to that conscious level, my relationship with Ed should make Ed comfortable enough to say, Joylyn, you may want to think about how you said that,
Right.
or how that came across.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're aiming for.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and it's been interesting for River Forest District 90 because unlike the school community at Oak Park River Forest High School, I think our equity work here largely is kind of been an untrodden field of vision. This is work that we're embarking upon much more recently and with a different set of eyes. And so, one of the goals we had very explicitly for our faculty and staff was to provide implicit bias and stereotype threat training through one of the partner organizations that District 97 and District 90 use, called the National Equity Project. And what was extraordinary for me was to watch our colleagues here, who I have the utmost respect for, our classroom teachers. They're so professional, so student-centered, had this learning experience that many of them had not been exposed to before. And there were really 2 explicit initial stages. The first was, after that training, gosh, now that I see it, I can't unsee it. Which is the epiphany, the awareness, whatever it is. And then the second, which I thought was really remarkable and speaks to their professionalism, was, now that I see it, what can I do about it? And how can we work collaboratively to make this a place that's more about belonging for kids, and that offers supports for colleagues in a way that's not threatening, and that where this conversation can be positive and not something that is unnerving. And we're not entirely there yet. I mean, I'd be lying to you if implied we were, but those, I think those deeper conversations are what is. And I would suspect, not just in D90, but probably in 297, it's what's helping to move us forward. And to have those conversations across the districts. I count these two women as terrific mentors and people I can turn to when I'm at a difficult point for advice and suggestion. And, so the resources, as Joyland mentioned earlier, the resources and the timing all seems to be intersecting in a really positive way.
I like what you said about being able to be coached. That's one of the key pieces about coaching is that you can have those conversations and they don't come across as threatening or evaluative. It's a way of helping each of us do better.
Right. But you have to have that relationship.
Yeah.
I think a barrier, though, to this work is, I don't want to say time, but I just have to put that on the table, because when we realize that implicit bias is something that we all have, and also when everyone realizes that there are times when you are the oppressed and times when you are the oppressor, every individual really has to do their own self-work and just constantly be conscious and aware of when your bias is coming through. And I think like that really causes all of us to have to be constantly reflective practitioners and really vulnerable enough that in that space with my team of teachers or my colleagues that I can share, I just had a meeting with, a student and, like you could share openly. I would say to do that kind of self-work in this like go busy world, and most of our teachers have really deep curriculums to get through within the 100 and some odd days of school. Just finding that time and really the time that we need is something that I have struggled with. If we're providing, we have the 4 Institute days, but it's really trying to get that buy-in support from the staff to be vulnerable and to develop those relationships, which requires time. We have probably on average every new staff orientation since I've been here, we average close to 50 people. We are I shouldn't say constantly because people do stay here, but I just don't know how to overcome that barrier.
It is difficult. We've tried to scaffold it, but there's still not enough time.
There's not enough time.
So we have, in addition to our Institute days, we have 2 full days in the fall and 2 full days in the spring for Beyond Diversity conversations, particularly with new staff in the fall.
Yes.
And then in the spring with staff who need
Refresher?
that refresher. We also built into, because we have late start Wednesdays, and so we've identified at least 7 of those specifically for care team work. And still it doesn't seem like
enough time.
Right.
Yeah.
But the professional development really is an important piece of it.
Yeah, it is.
And so how we provide that for our faculty, of course, needs to be intentional. One of the things I'm really proud of here in D90 is to work for a Board of Education who, as part of their governance mindset, wants to be part of this learning as well. And so they've engaged in numerous community learning events around equity and what their role can be. And excitedly, they've involved other entities within the community. Leadership from the River Forest Public Library has been tremendous as partners. We've had village trustees who've been involved in some of that community training. Community members with children, community members without. And so the
you guys have invited our boards too to be a part of it.
Well, and of course you've been reciprocal in different ways, but that's the thing, right? It's how as a community, both of my colleagues here have done a better job already expressing this, but how as a community we can embrace this. And the concept is called mutual accountability. It's the idea that all stakeholders have a role collaboratively in providing the environment we want to see. And how we see ourselves and others has got to be the goal.
Michael asked a question early on about what would we say to someone on the sidewalk. And you just hit the nail on the head that our boards, in addition to the community, is committed to this. Because I know since I've been here, you know, we've all got we got the 2 racial equity policies between us. But our board, each year that I've been here, have gone through a retreat on racial equity with them. They've gone through the restorative justice training. And so that level of commitment, I think, is key. It helps us to be able to work as hard. The fact that our boards are committed, the Tri-Equity Board and all of that, to getting this work done helps us to be able to do what we do every day.
Right. And I know that they're not here, but one of the other collaborations that we've been doing is River Forest and Oak Park, our libraries, you know, the executive directors, our communication folk, like how can we, I can't, our communication senior director, Chris Jaskolka, has done a phenomenal job. He and our website person, Amanda Sigfrill, with like getting videos out, and they're about to do one with a partnership with the library. They have been so helpful to us, you know, for us, the reading, the literacy, you know, by the time kids are entering 4th grade, that's a really strong push for us. And just their partnership, as well as Success of All Youth partnership with really helping us, you know, whether it's various organizations or making sure that all of our families have library cards, just the access to books. I think, you know, the support of our boards, this support that, you know, I have with the 2 of you guys, but also, you know, David Salib, I don't know, the executive director at the River Forest.
Yes, she's tremendous.
But you know, that's what makes Oak Park and River Forest unique as well. In my previous life, there was community engagement, but not to this level. There are so many organizations within our community that is focused on providing support, with looking at the equity aspects that exist and wanting to be supported, that is not found everywhere. And I'm just saying that from my previous experience.
That is true. That is.
It's just not. This is a unique place.
It is unique.
I also think, you know, when we talk about the teams that we are developing and the work, I think too, I have an amazing administrative team that is so focused on doing what has to be done for all of our students, and it's not a fight with them. And we have, I think all of us have teachers and faculty members, so it's that whole collective that are committed to the work. That's what I think drives us, because we're not doing this alone.
I want to bring up some, like bring in conversations getting a little too flowery.
Well, I was just about to say, in terms of the engagement piece.
Well, because I mean, you have some students. There are students in the district, and all of y'all's districts, who will hear this and still think that, I mean, they're still impatient with what's happening at, not just in the schools, but in Oak Park in general. All these various incidents that have been racially charged. From a student's perspective, who may see a teacher going through personal or professional development after, you know, having been racially insensitive, for instance, and then to see their peers having been suspended or expelled because they did something. I mean, it's like, I can see where they're coming from in terms of looking at this and saying, okay, that's great, but it's not enough. And then saying, wanting to be active and not feeling that they have a space to really be, to have some agency and autonomy. So how do you deal with those voices?
I can speak for myself right now. I have made myself available to not just groups of students in terms of, you heard me speak last night about the Student Leader Advisory Group. That encompasses representatives from all our clubs, student council, all ethnicities. And so that group helps me to get feedback on things that impact them. And so we've talked about what I can and cannot share with regards to personnel matters. There are students who I will say during the teachers who were on leave, I met with every single day. They said, I need an update. I met with them to give them an update. I think that's what helps me. It helps me to get them to understand that in life, there are going to be some things that will never be perfectly clear. But trying to help them understand that there are processes and procedures that by law, by board policy, by procedure that I must follow, that not only protect them as students, but protect the school system as well. And I've had students say, I understand it, don't like it, but I understand it. I think part of what is helping us at Oak Park and River Park, depending on who you ask, is the level of student voice that we are giving to students. When they walk out, I sit down and I listen. As I said, they don't always get what they want, but I listen, and I think that helps to develop the level of understanding. We've tried to communicate who students can go to when there are issues, when they feel that they have been subject to microaggressions. So we try to communicate that as well. We're still working on a process with our student leaders on how we can get all that communication out so that everyone knows. And so our student leaders, they serve as our ambassadors on some things. There's certain things we can say to them that they can say, no, this is not correct. This is how you deal with that. It's a work in progress. It's not perfect. But student voice, I think, is critical. That they have a seat at the table with a lot of decisions that we make. It is not a perfect science. And as I said, there's certain things that parents want me to say that I can't. And I have to deal with that. But our goal is to be as transparent as we possibly can be and still stay within the confines of school code and law.
Student voice looks a little different at the K-8, as you would imagine. One of the ways in which in District 90 we try to gather student perceptions about their experiences here, and they are more broad. They're not specific to just racial equity, but really around belongingness is a survey that we provide for them. And we worked very hard to create something that we administer it to children in grades 3 through 8 that is understandable for the younger children, and at the same time gives them the opportunity to share their voice about how they feel. And well, knowing that is really important because it can help guide us and our decision making as adults. I think having the opportunity to be asked means one thing to the students, and then having the chance to kind of look at the results from the children collaboratively can open other doors. You know, some of our teachers, when we shared with them the most recent, we administer that survey every other year. When we shared some of that most recent data with them, it was extremely powerful. In some ways affirming, in some ways disheartening about the comments that children shared. And so, not to sound too 30,000 foot with this, but at the end of the day, really, this is all about the kids. I had a gentleman who I know and respect very well say, God, Ed, there's a lot of talk about equity. I kind of thought your organization was about teaching and learning. And he was very well-meaning, and we had a wonderful conversation subsequent to that. But helping folks understand that having a strong culture that's based in respect and understanding where we see ourselves and others is the foundation. That's the precursor. Just like for children to come to school physically well.
Absolutely.
It's a precursor to their being able to learn and succeed. There's an interesting, a fantastic author named Claude Steele who writes on the subject of stereotype threat predominantly, and he equates the phenomenon for students of color, the experience that they have about and distrust oftentimes about what their role looks like in school with one of us having a snake in our home. Having a snake in your house is an unsettling thing. And if you walk through your world with that worry, the snake might do you great harm. You might never see it, but you don't know. Regardless, you end up having to carry that vigilance with you. So it's an additional burden that children, and it doesn't necessarily just have to be children of color, any child who comes from a traditionally underserved place carries this with them, and it really impacts their ability to learn and to succeed. And so that, for me, I think, and I won't speak for my district as a whole, but I think for many of us, is the heart of the work. It's really, setting high quality conditions for learning, helping children understand their place in the world. At the end of the day, the measure of how well we've done when the children leave us and go off into their lives is how they see themselves in the world, how effective they are, their level of self-efficacy, the degree to which they're self-actualized, I hate to use that term, and all of that comes back to this issue of the trust, the belongingness they felt, and how we are serving them in that regard.
As students who have graduated and come back since I've been here, and even some who prior to my time, what I've heard is going through Oak Park and River Forest school systems, one, expose them to a more diverse population, but also many of them felt equipped to become advocates for themselves in other situations when they went into college that may not be as diverse. Some through hard lessons of experiencing microaggressions in our institution, but some in being equipped with the voice to be able to speak on his or her own behalf. And so I think that while it's not maybe where we want it, it shows that there is some progression that is happening in terms of that sense of belonging and being able to say when we are not comfortable with our environment and things that are happening.
That's powerful.
Lastly, I feel like we've been here for an hour, I think. The last question, I don't want to leave without addressing the racial equity policies. I think you guys have already.
So our Board of Ed looked at the policy that's most germane to really equity in general is a policy that many districts share from the press associations, 7:10, called Equal Educational Opportunities.
So all of the districts are kind of looking at.
Well, I think District 90 is different. District 90 did not, after looking at that policy, there were some adjustments made to it, but they did not create a separate policy specific to racial equity. That's different, I believe, from 97.
Yeah, so 97, the board, not this last meeting, the meeting prior, has officially approved and adopted a policy. I hesitated when I said that because it's really written like a procedure, which is above and beyond what you would typically see in a policy, which is generally pretty broad. But I think the board felt that there were, and they did a lot of community conversations. I think they just felt, based on the support of what they want to see happen, including everything in that policy. So they are waiting until we have 3 new members coming on the board April 30th, and they're waiting until the new board is seated before they determine how they want to implement the things that are written in the policy. But for us, our vision statement that was approved in July of 2015 that says that we will create positive learning environments for all of our students that are equitable, inclusive, and focused on the whole child. Those 4 key statements, we've been doing that work. What the policy will do for us is give us more teeth. And it will also ensure that if we're trying to get to these metrics, that we'll have the support of the board to support support, financially, the work that we, want to see happen.
You will see some similarities in the 97 policy and the 200. The difference you will see is the procedural stuff that's in 97's policy will be procedure for 200.
So the policy and the procedures will be separate.
Well, they are,
Most of the
every
time, yeah.
district has policy and every district has procedure. The policy is the commitment to, and for lack of a better word, the charge to do.
Yeah, of the board.
Of the board. The procedure, which is administratively drafted, is the how you get it done. And so our committee consisted of community members, administration, faculty, board, and students. And we went round and round as well about the procedural aspect, because historically what we heard is in this community there's a lot of talk, but there's not a lot of action to make sure everything gets done. And so, as you heard me say last night, one of the pieces that you will see is there will be a charge for me as the superintendent to hit all of those, to develop a plan or procedure that hits all of those things that are important to this community. And that's a welcoming school environment, that's the resource allocation to make sure that there's money to make sure it gets done, the accountability piece, the hiring piece, the workplace readiness, and to make sure that there's a tool that will identify and allow us to address those things that are happening in the classroom that minimize our students, our black and brown students. And then there's also the piece of really looking at discipline and how our black and brown young men specifically and our special ed students are being sanctioned, for lack of a better word, are being held to a different level of discipline than our other students. They wanted to make sure that that was in there, and that there would be metrics developed and an annual regular reporting out publicly as to where we are. And so that teeth is in the policy, the how-to will be in the procedure. Because our board and our community wanted to show the strong commitment to this, it will not be a part of 7:110.
Right.
7:10, it won't be. It's right behind it. Because we wanted that to stand out, specifically our commitment to racial equity. The other piece is, in that was a recommendation for a position. And so because we were so committed to it, we actually had the board approve the position even before the policy was approved. And so in 30 minutes, I'm interviewing for those positions. And our goal is out there now for first read. We will be presenting it Tuesday night again. Actually, it's being presented tonight to Community Council at 7:30. It will be presented at the Committee of the Whole on Tuesday. And then we're asking for board approval on the 25th. And with the charge that we have the procedure in place prior to the start of the next coming school year.
And how will you manage public expectation when it comes to these policies? A lot of people will be looking at this and saying, the clock is ticking. So, you better do something. These,
one of the things
everything ought to be
we
solved after this policy. How do you-
Well,
Let me
it doesn't,
speak actually to that,
it doesn't get solved once the policy.
Right, I was going to say,
People
while
doing
each
the work.
district has a different approach, I think, to ensuring accountability for the work, I think the one thing that all three districts hold in common is an appreciation for the importance of structures.
Yeah.
And so while it's, many of the elements that Joe Lynn spoke to in 200, I know there are several of those in
And
97.
we're already working on it.
District 200 has two organizations working together, the Inclusiveness Advisory Board and our Board Equity Committee. All three districts have members that are part of the Tri-Board Equity Committee. It's the structures and the people that will hold our feet to the fire. And you're right about the sense of urgency. I mean, we want to do this work thoughtfully, and we want to make sure that we take the time to do it right. There is urgency to the
So
work.
people can get involved with some of this work.
Absolutely. I think that they could reach out to any of us, and we would be glad to find a role for them.
Our community's had a strong voice in those pieces that they want to see happen, that will be in the procedure. And as I said, every committee we have has the stakeholder voice. And so as we report, strategic plan has stakeholder voice. And so as we move forward with the accountability measure, there'll be stakeholder voice in that.
I appreciate this.
Thank you.
Fruitful and longer than expected, but it was good.
Yeah, I guess we had something to say.
You did, yeah.
Right.
Once you start talking, you kind of get in the flow.
And that's what superintendents do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.